How much longer can Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defy condemnation and stay in power? He is under intense pressure on so many fronts, but still he continues with his onslaught on Gaza. Recent polls show 71% of Israelis want Netanyahu to step down. This as demands for a ceasefire, even from the US, grow ever louder. I'm Charlotte Beredny, and today's Newsmaker is Benjamin Netanyahu. The war in Gaza is into its 12th month and has taken the lives of over 40,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children. More than 1,200 Israelis were killed by Hamas on October the 7th alone, with around 100 more still being held hostage in the enclave. Despite another round of huge anti-government protests on Sunday night, reportedly the largest in Israel's history, with some 750,000 demonstrators across the country, nothing seems able to stop Benjamin Netanyahu from his course of action in Gaza. He's still facing a potential arrest warrant from the ICC, corruption charges at home in Israel, and his right-wing coalition is threatening to fall apart if he agrees to a ceasefire. Family members of the hostages still in Gaza are understandably at breaking point, accusing Netanyahu of sacrificing their loved ones by even refusing to contemplate a deal.
The public understands that continuing the military pressure will get the hostages killed. A week ago, we stood here and warned that for the sake of his own political survival, Netanyahu is willing to let the hostages be murdered in captivity. 6 dead hostages were then brought back in body bags, just a day after being executed by Hamas. The blood of the murdered hostages is on Netanyahu's hands.
At the heart of the stalled peace talks lies the Philadelphia corridor, which is Gaza's border with Egypt. As part of a US proposed ceasefire, which Hamas has reportedly agreed to, Israel would hand back control of the corridor to the Palestinians. But Netanyahu claims the control of the corridor is key to Israeli security.
But we also agreed to begin discussions about a permanent ceasefire. And the conditions that we shall have for a permanent ceasefire must include a situation where the Philadelphia corridor cannot be perforated. Somebody has to be there. Somebody has to be there. Look, I don't care. Bring me anyone who will actually show us, not on paper, not in words, not in a slide, but on the ground, day after day, week after week, month after month, that they can actually prevent the recurrence of what happened there before. We're open to consider it.
Netanyahu now finds himself increasingly cornered. If he agrees to a ceasefire, then there's every chance his far-right coalition partners will pull out and force fresh elections. But by continuing his deadly war on Gaza, he's not only alienating the Arab world, but increasingly Europe and even his main backer, the US. President Biden is rumoured to be offering one more chance for Netanyahu to sign a peace deal in what's being called a take-it-or-leave-it situation. But it's not clear what sort of pressure Washington will exert if Netanyahu refuses again. So, is Netanyahu finally on borrowed time? Joining me now to debate that and more are, from West Jerusalem, member of the Knesset for the Hadash party, Aida Touma-Sliman. From Tel Aviv, political analyst and contributor to the Haaretz newspaper, Akiva Eldar. And from London, associate fellow of the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House, Yossi Mekelberg. Well, let's start then with the war. We are getting towards the one-year mark, as we heard, but Netanyahu's war goals have not been achieved, and we still don't really know what a total victory looked like. So I guess if I can start with you, Aida Touma-Sliman, would the end of the war be the end of Benjamin Netanyahu's premiership?
Well, it depends very much on when and how the war will end. Because, if Netanyahu is going to end the war by agreeing to an exchange of prisoners agreement or kidnapped, I think it will give him a little bit of push of support in the public opinion, the Israeli public opinion. We have also to pay attention to the fact that Netanyahu has been raising in the polls in the last month or 2 months, despite everything, despite the disasters, despite the war and the continuous situation with the hostages. I think it shows that he can still manipulate somehow the people. I don't think that Netanyahu wants to have an agreement. I don't think he wants to end the war, because it is for him not only a tactic matter or a short-term matter having this war. He really see it as a window for him to implement part of his strategical and long-term plan of controlling as much as he can of the Palestinian territories, if it is in Gaza or in the West Bank. And for him, he understands very well that if he ended at this point, he didn't have any victory. He is only a big failure at this point, and it will bring to the end of his political life for sure.
Akiva Eldar, do you also think that the war is part of what's keeping Netanyahu in power now, and that whatever gripes the public might have about him, the existential threat and the fear of Hamas is unifying the country, and the fight to do that is greater?
Well, I think that we have also to look to the east part of the map. The war is not just happening in Gaza. At the same time, what we see is the extension of the occupation and the settlements in the West Bank. Hamas and Netanyahu are sharing the same enemy. Their nemesis is the PLO, Abu Mazen, and for Netanyahu, the total victory means putting an end to the Oslo process that we are going to mark this week on the 13th of September. And actually, Hamas, as long as the Hamas is there, Netanyahu is safe with his ideology. He said, and we have to listen to this, that he wants to be remembered in history as the defender of Israel. Now, what we see now, of course, is that he is turning to be the destroyer of Israel. But for him, the worst enemy, it used to be Iran, but now it's the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, not the Hamas. And this is the reason that he made it possible to channel money to Sinwar. Perhaps this is even the reason that we have to remind the viewers that he was the one who released Sinwar in the Shalit deal, when he released more than 1,000 Hamas members in a deal for an Israeli single soldier. So I think that Netanyahu has already given Hamas the victory. And the victory is that the PLO and what's left of from Oslo is not on anybody's side.
Okay, and Yossi Mekelberg, do you agree with that, that to some extent Netanyahu and Hamas want the same thing, which is to continue fighting? Or have you seen any sign of change in Hamas's position?
Well, I haven't seen change in Hamas' position, but no doubt in my mind that Netanyahu and his far-right, the most far-right government in Israel history, put Israel in the most perilous strategic situation. It's not only in Gaza, it's as Akiva mentioned in the West Bank, it's in Lebanon, open up and almost enabled the axis of resistance to operate in a way that it couldn't before. And yes, he was led by a misperception, a totally wrong misperception that by divide and rule between the PLO, between the Fatah and Hamas, between the West Bank and Gaza, he can prevent a two-state solution. This was his main aim. So in a way, he succeeded in it, but he created even a worse situation for Israel. And again, he's definitely not seen now as the defender of Israel. He failed on October 7. The way that Israel conducted the war opened 7 fronts. Hostages are still held for nearly a year. Israel's credibility in the world is an all-time low. Sorry. And as a result of it, Israel is in the worst position, even here in the UK, in relations with the British government. It's been for a very long time. So in this case, it's no one is sure that Hamas wants a ceasefire, but definitely it doesn't seem that the Israeli government wants a ceasefire. The thing is, the leadership not necessarily want what the people on both sides need.
I mean, Yossi, you mentioned the UK there, the US, of course, Israel's biggest backer. I wonder, Aida Touma-Sliman, do you think the war and then by extension Netanyahu's career is contingent on US support for his policies?
Well, I think it's for the first time we can see that there is, not for the first time actually, also before that, Netanyahu had tension with the administration, with the American administration. The American administration understands now that this war, this genocide cannot continue. And it has to be stopped, either for election matters in the United States, where the Democrats are really were afraid that they are going, and still they might lose the administration. They might not, their president's nominee might not be elected, and they understand that they need to approach the situation with a more moderate, let's say, approach. But on the other hand, this does not mean, in my opinion, they have a problem with Netanyahu and Netanyahu policies. They don't have a problem with Israel in general. And they want to support both sides. Netanyahu wants to support a different nominees to the president's election. He would love to see Trump getting to the White House. And on the other hand, I think that the Democrats would like to see someone else controlling or as a prime minister inside Israel. Both they have attention and understand they are not able to work very well together, but it does not mean that the main interest of the two states is, and the main alliance of the Israel in the world, which is enabling at the same time Netanyahu to continue with this war, is the United States of America. I don't see that the administration in this reality is let's say a kind of someone who is bridging in between the two sides. The United States of America gave and still giving a full support even to Netanyahu that they have misunderstandings with, if it is financial or military-wise or political-wise.
Okay, and as you say, the election's coming up in November. Akida Ela, do you agree, first of all, and do you think that Benjamin Netanyahu can persuade either Harris or Trump to support him in quite the same way that the Biden administration has done?
Yeah, I think that for Netanyahu, and I think that he considers himself to be an expert on American politics, but I'm afraid that he has lost it. For Netanyahu, the total victory is Trump and the Republicans taking over both the White House and the Congress. But I am afraid that even Trump will not be willing to invest as much as Biden has been doing in the conflict, like he did and is still doing now in order to bring back the captives. But I want to remind you that after the election, no matter who wins, Biden will still be president. And in '88, right after the elections, there was an historical move by the outgoing president, Ronald Reagan, when he decided in December '88, after November's election, to start the dialogue with the PLO, which led to the two-state solution, to Madrid, and then to Oslo. So wait for surprises. I think that Biden has unfinished business with Netanyahu, who did everything to humiliate him. And even if, as I said, if Trump wins, he also doesn't forget what Netanyahu did to him. Did a quote, put it in his pocket, and forget about the other part of the deal, which is starting negotiations on a two-state solution.
And we've talked about Israel's allies abroad. I want to turn now to the situation inside of Israel, because we've seen these huge protests going on week after week, but really coming to a head this last weekend, some of the biggest reportedly in Israel's history ever, with hundreds of thousands of Israelis on the streets calling for the release of hostages, but also for a changing government. I just wonder, Yossi Mekelberg, do you think the demonstrations have made any difference so far to Benjamin Netanyahu? And do you think they're sustainable at this scale? Because that's the critical question.
Also, add to the previous point, also it was President Clinton that gave his, the famous Clinton parameters in the dying days of his second term. So American presidents can actually make a difference until their very last day in the White House. But back to your question, I think there is an accumulated impact. We see more and more people going back to the streets. Bear in mind, many protesters were there before October 7, protesting against the assault of Netanyahu government on the Israeli democracy, on the independence of the judiciary. And I think it stopped naturally after the attack of October 7 and during most of the war. Now it is changing because it's obvious there is no total victory if anyone understands what it meant from the beginning. There are no hostages coming home. And at the end of the day, Israel is entrenched in a never-ending war. So as a result of this, there is now a coalition of people. Some of those demonstrators, protesters in the streets voted for Netanyahu, unlike what happened before October 7. So this makes a difference. It's create a new coalition, new arrangement. However, I think there are things that are going against the protester. One, that this coalition has no alternative. They know that if they give up, the 64 there, they will lose elections, so they hold to their seats because the alternative for them is opposition, and for Netanyahu, he faces corruption trial without being a prime minister, something he really doesn't want to. At the same time, if you look at the impact that this protester can make, elections are still not until 2026. So under these circumstances, all what they can do is to increase the pressure, to act as a very vibrant civil society, and hope that there will be eventually found 4 decent MKs from the coalition that will say enough is enough, because Israel will be entrenched in a war, in a bloody war for many years if there is no change.
Akiva Eldar, I saw you nodding there during that answer. I wonder whether you think that the protests have made any difference, and do you think they can make a difference to Netanyahu himself, a man who just seems so impervious to pressure?
I think that if we look back at the attempt to create a judicial reform or revolution, the High Court is not disconnected from the street, and they have saved Israel's democracy in the last war against it. And I agree with Yossi that this government is still busy with the destruction of the democracy. But what we saw yesterday is a ruling of 3 judges. 2 of them were appointed by the ultra-right Minister of Justice, Ayelet Shaked, and they ruled against the Minister of Justice from the Likud. And we are now looking at a possibility of constitutional crisis that never happened before, that the Minister of Justice has declared yesterday that he will not respect the ruling of the Supreme Court. And this is a new ballgame. I don't think that it will come directly from the demonstrators, but the Supreme Court is still strong and delivering what it needs to deliver.
I wonder whether you agree with that, Aida Touma-Sliman, that perhaps it won't be from the protesters themselves from the streets, but it might be the impact that that has on democracy elsewhere within Israeli society. And my second question is also, do you feel like Benjamin Netanyahu's government cares at all about the hostages' fate? And do you think these protests have made, what kind of impact do you think the protests have made?
Well, first of all, let me tell you about Netanyahu, if he cares. Netanyahu do not care for the hostages, or actually, I can think even for the citizens of Israel. He is willing to jeopardize everything in order to reach what he put for himself as goals, to stay as prime minister, to protect himself in the short term from the trial and from investigation about the failure of 7th of October, but also for a long run to be able to put his print in the history of Israel by ruining any possibility for creating a Palestinian state. That's on one hand. But on the other, yes, of course, I do agree with Yossi and Akiva that for our regret, all those demonstrations are not going to make the government fall. Because just now, while we are talking, we are in mid of discussions about changes in the budget in 2024. And there was a threat in the beginning from parts of the coalition, mainly Yahadut HaTorah, that they are not going to vote. That would have created, for the first time, a real crisis inside the coalition. But Netanyahu managed to silence them, and they are voting, which means the coalition is very solid, is very strong for our regret. On the other hand, there is no real opposition that is solid and strong and understand and able to bring any kind of alternative policy to what Netanyahu is suggesting for the people who are afraid, who are terrified, who are misled by this government. For our regret, those 2 issues, on one hand, a very strong coalition and a very
divided.
An opposition that's really divided, don't have any real program to suggest to the people. That is a combination that is clear is not going to lead for a very quick fall of the government. On the other hand, I have to say, it might be that it's not the kind of a government that you go to sleep and next day they are vanishing. This is not the kind of coalition. But of course, every little crisis that is happening on the constitutional level, on the army level, on the fact of the anger of the people is building up toward a moment where it might be inevitable that Netanyahu goes to election. Netanyahu will wait to a moment when he thinks that he can win the election and then he might go to election.
And Yossi Mekelberg, I'm just going to end with you, if I may. We don't have that much longer left than this situation where there's no real opposition. Netanyahu willing to jeopardize everything in Aida's words. Do you agree then? And how long do you give Netanyahu at this point?
Well, it's hard to tell, and I agree with the previous speaker that, he knows no one knows to manipulate the Israeli political system better than Netanyahu. But there is the responsibility of the opposition as well. They should get their act together and work together in tandem and build a viable alternative that people will think that they want to vote for. At the same time, I won't underestimate the protests. What you need is protests day in, day out, maintaining their presence in the streets and expressing their opinion. You need strong media. You need the Supreme Court and the justice system to operate despite the attack on it. And I think if they work together, at the same time, Netanyahu is on borrowed time. The big question that I don't think we have the answers, how long is this borrowed time?
Okay, well, in a world of division, how nice to end our programme on some agreement. I'd like to thank all three of our guests, Aida Touma-Sliman, Akiva Eldar and Yossi Mekelberg. And thanks to our viewers for watching the Newsmakers. Don't forget you can follow us on X and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. I'm Charlotte Biredny. Bye-bye for now.